Our guest on Free Your Inner Guru today has a not so coincidental last name to mine. I would like to welcome author K.A. Tucker to Free Your Inner Guru. And you're brave coming on here to be interviewed by your sister-in-law, Kathleen. Welcome to the podcast.
I've been married to your brother long enough that I feel like I'm okay.
You feel like you'll probably survive it.
I probably will, yeah. I've survived him for this long, so I think I'll be okay.
So, and you've survived us en masse, so that's pretty telling. So Kathleen, it's awesome to have you here. We've talked about doing this for ages, and probably even in the measure of the number of books that you've released in this time. I was always saying to you, oh, you could come on the podcast and it would be really neat to talk to you from, a professional point of view, instead of how much longer will the turkey need before it's done.
Yeah.
But I would love to introduce everyone to you as someone who has been fiercely committed to your craft and then career of writing. And I would love to go back in time. And I'm not even really sure how much of this, your story I know or remember of when you made the transition from a very corporate life into the life of an author, a creator, and, your own entity. So I guess we have to kind of go back to a little bit of your previous career to set the stage of what that was like.
Yes. I started my career in business and sales strategy, and I worked at Procter & Gamble for I think 10 or 11 years, and then I was at Coca-Cola for a while as well. But about 3/4 of the way through there, so around 2009, so it was when my second daughter, your second niece, was born, and I was at home on maternity leave, and I found that pretty difficult, being at home with two kids. My older one she has autism, but as you obviously know, so I'm kind of saying this more for everyone else listening.
Absolutely.
But we didn't know at that time that she had this diagnosis. And so, but it was a bit challenging. So we had the two girls at home. They were very close in age, and it was tough. And so I was going from this corporate world, which I thrived in, to being at home on maternity leave. And frankly, I needed an escape. And when you're on maternity leave with two little kids, you don't really get to go anywhere without your two little kids. So at that point, it was just more of a passion project for me. I thought, you know what, I love reading. I've always loved reading. I have an idea and I'm going to just sit down and write and see what happens. And from there, it just spun into something that was an escape for me every day. I needed that hour or two, to sit down and write when the kids were sleeping or late at night. And it became something that I just absolutely loved to do. And that's where it started, I guess, for writing anyway.
Would it be fair to say then, it sounds to me like in the beginning, it was something you did for yourself?
Absolutely.
Not so much, I want to be a published author with 20 plus books, and starting with that great big vision of, I want this different lifestyle and really in some ways the opposite of the way a lot of conversations or people's stories go. They begin with this end in mind, and you may or may not happen.
Right. I had no plans. It was 100% just for myself. And it's funny. I remember there was a point when I finished the first book, or I should say the first draft of the first book. And I thought, you know what, I have something here. This feels real. I love this, but this feels like something I would like other people to read. But I need to actually learn how to write a book at that point. So, that was the next stage of my career. But I had no intention. I mean, I had worked very hard for my career. I had gone to school. I had worked extremely hard to climb in the ranks within the company. And to quit all of that and go write books didn't even really enter my mind, partly because it wasn't a plan, but also because writing and being a creative is such a challenging industry and a career that it just didn't seem possible. It didn't seem feasible at that point.
So your first book, and I don't want to get the title wrong, but in my mind, it's 10 Tiny Breaths. Am I
No,
wrong?
it was a YA fantasy novel. It was called Anathema, and it was just a fun fantasy novel that I wrote and self-published. Ended up self-publishing it because after I'd finished the first draft and realized I wanted to do something with this, I then realized I need to learn to do something with this, and so I spent some time basically tearing it apart, doing an online course on how to revise your novel when you have a manuscript to turn it into a novel and something that people can read. And so that took me another, half a year or so and that was a passion for me as well, because I was learning the craft at that point. And then from there, I did a bit of research on publishing, and that's when I learned how difficult it is to get an agent, how difficult the publishing world is, how, all of the challenges. And at that point, I think I sent a couple query letters out. I thought, you know what, I'll just try this. Rejections came back, but it didn't faze me because, again, this wasn't something I was, chasing as a career, really. But at the same time, self-publishing was just taking off at that point. So before that, self-publishing was very much that kind of that vanity idea. It was what you did when you couldn't get published, you went and self-published. But in 2011, around that time was when the market was really beginning to explode, and that opportunity was out there. Amazon was coming on with their platform to be able to self-publish, make it easy for people. And so I researched that. And then from there, I thought, well, I'm just going to do this myself because I have my career. This is my fun passion project. Why wouldn't I do this myself? So I hired the editor, I hired the cover artist. I did all of that, which again was enjoyable, partly because of my business background. So for me to be able to learn an entirely new industry in that way was exciting. And then I went and self-published it, and I just put it out there and kind of learned how, as I went.
And how were the results of doing it that way? Like, did you sell many of those first books? How did it?
Yeah, you know what?
Second book, but because
I right around that time as well. So again, it was the self-publishing industry was exploding. The online blogger industry was exploding at that point. So that's where I began creating connections with bloggers, and that's a whole other world. And so the bloggers were the readers who were out there championing my books. And so from there, yes, I wrote three books, just self-published them. And then the fourth book was 10 Tiny Breaths. And that one exploded. Basically, I put that out there, completely different genre. It was contemporary romance. I wrote it and I put it out there. And then that's what led to an offer for an agent representation and a publisher coming to me with an offer. So, and that's when I had to make that decision of, I love doing this. There's no way that I can continue with a career that I have and write, which is the career that I now realize I want, and be a mom. So one of these things has to give. Obviously, mom is not going to give. And I love the writing. And if I can make something of it, it just brought me that much more joy and fulfillment than the other side, the sales side. So
I remember your first three books, and let's talk about genre for a few minutes. How did you choose? Because I guess you changed genres. You started off in fantasy, young adult fantasy, and then you made a conscious decision to choose genre, and that one has either stuck or developed over the years. So what was that like for you?
For me, I've always been, as a reader, I've always been very eclectic, and I enjoy every genre. I enjoy all genres. And so for me, it's always been more about getting an idea and going with it. And when I came up with the storyline for Tiny Breaths, that was contemporary romance. Again, self-publishing with romance, that's a great place to go. If you want to start with self-publishing in any genre, romance is one. And so that was kind of a conscious decision in one way, because I thought, you know what, I can really build my platform this way. There's only so far I can go with a young adult fantasy. And even today, when you look at the publishing industry, people are typically traditionally published who are writing fantasy. You can still do extremely well as an indie writer writing fantasy and self-publishing fantasy, but in YA, but it's typically books that are going to be in bookstores, right? That's where your young adults are going to pick up. They're not necessarily e-readers. They're typically paperback readers and hardback readers. So it became a bit of understanding the market, which has changed from 2012 to now. So, but it's really about understanding, following, keeping up with the market. And
when people hear young adult or YA, what's the typical demographic of that reader? And I've got a follow-up question that.
Sure. It's 13 to 17 is usually the young adult.
Okay. And then, so I have been to a number of your book launches or signings at, say, Chapters or Indigo here in Toronto. And the people who are there looking for you to sign the books, they are not 13 to 17 years old. There's many people there who are, quite frankly, my age, and I'm more than a decade chronologically older than you.
Right. So 10 Tiny Breaths was not young adult. It was definitely not that. That was moving into the new adult and adult, frankly. And then beyond that, I've pretty much written all kind of, I would call it adult books. Some of them are much more young and flirty, that 18 to in the 20s, and some of them are a little bit older, right? 30s and such. So, but I would say that there are a lot of adult readers who read young adult, especially fantasy, I would say, not the romance, but the fantasy.
So when and I'm having kind of a fun memory right now, but when you left corporate life for the author life, that's a big change for your household, your kids, your husband, your family. And what was that like putting your stake in the ground and saying, yeah, I've been over here doing this all this time really, really well and successfully, and now I'm going over here. What was that like for you?
It was a big, in one sense, it was a huge shock for me. And then in another, it was a no-brainer. It was one of the easiest decisions I've ever had to make. Because at that point I knew what I wanted to do, and selling, Coca-Cola and soap and Pampers and whatnot, as great of a career as that was, it didn't bring me joy at all. Whereas writing and working for myself as well, that's another, there's the writing aspect, the creative aspect, but then there's also the business aspect of this that I'm thriving in. I thrive working for myself. So there was just so many elements to this that just made sense. And frankly, I'm not going to lie, I had a great offer from the publisher. So I was set up to be able to make that move. Would I have left my job before I had that publisher's offer? No. I would have had to have a few more self-published books under my belt and have some income, some reliable income coming in. So it was a huge jump, but I made it in a smart way, I feel, because I had that publisher's deal.
And you were already doing the work. Like you had already, you'd already developed the discipline and practice of showing up every day as an author.
Yes. Yeah. And it was exhausting. I'm not going to lie, because you're running. And that's when I said I knew that I had to make a decision. I could not do all of those things because that side of my life was taking off. There's just no way that I could do any of it well if I attempted to do it all. So it was at that point a matter of deciding what really is important to me. What do I want to be doing in 20 years, 30 years when I look back on my life? And it's funny, I remember because I had left Coca-Cola and I had only been there for 9 months or 10 months. And it was a bit of I've just, signed the ink on the contract. Here's my 2 weeks notice because I have a book due in 6 weeks kind of thing with Coke. And all of the managers there when I told them, they did say, you know what, we don't blame you. Like, of course you're going to take this deal. Like, this is fantastic. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So that it was nice to hear that, that people recognized kind of how special that was, that opportunity was.
Yeah. That, and okay. So I know it's not related to you being at Coke, but I can't think of Coca-Cola without thinking of my dad.
I know, which is so weird.
Right? So, and just for sort of historical perspective, my dad, who's no longer with us, but my dad worked at Coca-Cola, and I went to work there when I was a kid in their offices and for a summer job, and my gap year between high school and university. And so that was coincidental, but it brings him to mind as a perfect example of somebody who's an avid reader of fantasy, and who read all of your books. And then
he was like my number one fan.
He totally was. And then he stopped calling her Kathleen. It was which I'm not sure, let the record show, I'm not sure you're that fond of. But,
no.
But he would be like K.A. and then launch in. And then when you switch genre into the romance, and you write romance really, really well, and that includes writing sex scenes. I remember my dad just being so discombobulated about the whole thing.
I went into denial. I'm like, he's not reading any of this. It can't happen. So I just assume he didn't read anything after that.
Yeah. Well, I happen to know different. Oh my God, he would be so excited for you in terms of how you've done, and just to kind of bring forward into the present. You were talking about the challenges of being home alone I guess you were home alone because Paul was working full-time corporate in those years as well, with the two kids, and we're in the middle of the pandemic, and everybody's been at home with their kids.
Yeah.
And just this, before we got on here, we were catching up about like, how's it's going? And we were talking about, it's like, I feel like I'm pushing against the environment all the time.
Yeah.
And you had to deal with that, I guess, kind of throughout your career.
Yeah. And it can get really hard sometimes, because this would be the case for anyone who's self-employed. It's very easy for everything else to become a priority over me saying, you know what, I need to sit down and write. And I can't do it for 1 or 2 hours. That's not how I write. I have to sit down for large blocks of time and really get my head into it, 4, 5, 6 hours. And it can be difficult. And I think you start to learn, for me anyway, I've learned what works for me, what doesn't work for me, times of the day where I'm most productive. And I have a sign on my door now. Basically, I had to put it up with the pandemic, right? Where it basically says, unless you're bleeding, do not knock on this door. Because if the door is closed, put it that way. If my door is closed, you don't come here. If you're hungry, you go, you get your own sandwich, you figure it out. You're old enough, you figure it out. My kids are not 3 and 4. I'm not letting them run around with knives and scissors downstairs, right? So they can figure it out. But it can get, yes, it's a balance. It's a constant balancing act. And for 6 years, I was under contract with my publisher because I signed several contracts with them back to back to back. And writing under a contract under deadline is extremely tough. And I didn't realize how tough it was until I wrote my last book and handed in and was no longer under contract. And it's unbelievable the pressure that has come off of my shoulders now. So I'm not in a rush to go back in under a contract at this point.
So yeah, let's talk about that, because a publisher contract is something that would be highly desirable, as you found it very beneficial in terms of being able to leave Coke and go, or leave corporate and go and do that full time. But you more recently did decide to go back to self-publishing. So
for now, yes.
For now. So what informed that decision if you're cool sharing that. And because I think a lot of people, and maybe we're just all geared differently. I'm not necessarily saying me, but for some people, having a hard deadline and that accountability would be the thing that gets it done.
Yeah, and that for me, that is the case, having a deadline. And mind you, now I do still set my own deadlines, because now I have editors I have to hire, and I have to respect their calendars, basically, right? So I do still end up with deadlines, and I do that makes me tick. I need a deadline. So for me, so to step back for one piece or 1 second, I would say when you're writing a book and you're trying to get a publisher or to sell to a publisher, typically you would have the whole book finished and you would write your book, and then your agent would take it out and shop it. And that's kind of where I want to be now going forward, because for a good stretch there, which again was fantastic, and it allowed me to build up a platform and a backlist. But I was writing to deadlines, so I was selling in ideas, basically, and I would sell in 3 or 4 ideas or one idea, and we would sign a 4-book contract. And so I would have to write 4 books to that publisher, and they weren't written. And so, and you'd be like, okay, for the next 2 years, here's all your dates and gates. And, right now, for example, being in the pandemic, if this had happened back then, I'm not sure what I would have done, because, and to be fair, the publisher would have totally understood and said, yes, we can push it, we can move it. They were fantastic in that. But it's like writing with a gun to your head, basically, knowing in 3 months you have to have this book done, or in 4 or 6 months you have to have this done. And it's challenging. So, that being said, now going forward, my plan is, depending on what genre I'm writing in. So for example, thrillers or suspense, I would want that traditionally published, but I would want to finish that book. I don't want to go back to that stress of kind of the deadline, looming
like selling
deadline.
the proposal. Then
selling the proposal.
The deadline. You want to go out with a completed book.
Yeah. That's kind of, and it took me 6 years of being in one contract to the next and the next, and then stepping out of that. And I'm also in a position financially when I can make that choice, because I have enough of a platform that I can self-publish something, and I can sell books that way. And I can support my family, basically. So while, I have a thriller that I started last year, and I'm not done it, and eventually I'll start writing it again this year, and maybe I'll finish it next year. And then from there, we can take it out and try and see if somebody's interested in it, shop it around. But it's not the same pressure as saying you have to write this and it has to be done in 6 months or 5 months and go, basically.
Yeah. And I think what's coming across to me, is that would be all well and good to be under that pressure, but then you must, knowing you and given the amount of how prolific you have been as a writer in that period of time, you're getting other ideas for other books that may call you, or you may have more energy or creative energy, or every other kind of energy for it, but you're over here doing this instead. And that's not all that different. That makes it work versus creation.
Yeah. And I am not special or unique in that. That happens. I swear every writer friend that I have will tell you the exact same thing happens, where they sit down to write one book and they want to write something else. So it's just one of those. And then when you have 4 of those that you have to write back to back to back, you're right. Exactly. It becomes a job. It becomes work.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm not sure, it's so funny. I go back and forth, like the pendulum swings where, and I have a conversation this morning to reference with a group that I've been in this workshop called the Creatives Workshop, with Seth Godin. It's just finishing up. It started early February. And the whole idea was you were going to create for 100 days straight and go through a program which dealt very heavily and thoroughly in genre. And my project that I took there was, I'm writing my memoir. And even for me to say those words is a very strange thing, because I have the chatter of, well, who are you to be writing a memoir? Why would anybody want to but it's nonfiction, what I'm writing, and it's not a self-help book per se.
Right.
And so that's what it is. And this whole thing of showing up to it and developing the habit and understanding where that fits in the rhythm and structure of your day, and how showing up and then letting people see you show up creates an audience around you. And these are all things I've understood intellectually, but to see it actually in practice in a very, in a semi-public environment has been really interesting. And it makes me think about, like you've developed quite an audience online, and how has that helped you over the years? And you just released a book this week. So you're going through that right now, where you're self-publishing, having a release, you've got your audience. How do you approach that with them, and how do you show up?
You're frozen. Oh, sorry, you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Cause you got to look. So that's good. That was a long-winded question. So I'll edit that out, but let me just make a note. 2:36. Okay. Are we back? Oh, how annoying. You're frozen too.
Okay, you there? No, now you're there.
Okay, I think we're back.
Okay, you're back now.
Okay. How about I'm going to backtrack? I asked a really long and winding question anyways.
Okay.
Yeah. So did you hear me when I was talking about being in that course writing every day?
Yes. Yeah. So then you went into having an audience.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I just saw that as I wanted to share that with you, to kind of tap into the idea of what having an audience does for your work. And you're in the middle of a book launch now, or
yes.
You just launched last week. So how has that been different for you coming out the other end of being under contract and building all these years?
Well, I've always been fairly open with readers. I find that, them knowing what I'm working on, they get excited, which is fantastic. And I do like to let them know what I'm working on. Sometimes I'll share teasers. Sometimes I'll share little ideas. Sometimes I keep everything really close to my chest. And I did that with Wild at Heart because, frankly, I was petrified that the book would be terrible, because the first book, The Simple Wild, did so well. And it's had such a great readership. The readers have really, really, really loved it. And I think they were as paranoid that a sequel would be terrible as I was paranoid that the sequel would be terrible. So I kept it very close to my chest to what it was about. And to the point where I didn't even release a description until I think a month or so before the book released. And at that point, the book was pretty much done. But actually I think that might have got them more interested in what was going on and what was happening. Them readers knowing that I'm writing something, it does, they get excited, and then I'm happy that they're excited, because I obviously want to write books that they want to read. That's why I'm here. I mean, as much as I write for myself, in the sense that I write what I want to write. I won't write necessarily what they want me to write. I'll give them a story that I think they're going to enjoy, but I have to enjoy writing it. So having them excited and eager to read it fuels me. And I do need to write every day. So your point about that, it being a muscle and being habit, it's 100% accurate. I'm on a little bit of a break now. I do need to get into writing again soon, but even being away for a week or two, it just getting those first few days in of me sitting down back into the habit of focusing and writing every day it's tough. And then once I get into it, I'm in a rhythm. And then after a week or two, I'm fine. But I have to get there, and I'm procrastinating in the last couple of days, but I've also been busy with the book release. But yeah, it's 100% it's a muscle that you have to, and it's a rhythm.
Do you find if you go, and I'm not sure you have gone quiet for prolonged periods, but this is a little bit of the struggle that I'm having right now. Is I started out the year with the intention to release a very short blog every day and also sustain the podcast. And then I got into this program where I started writing the memoir, and I was writing every day, but it was very easy to lose momentum because it was all the things.
It's too much. It's too much because you're looking at creating and then marketing, and you're looking at it as creating and a business. And I mean, I can spend all day, every day doing business stuff, marketing stuff, all of the business stuff. I can do that, but then I won't get any writing done. And then, where am I at? So I have to prioritize and focus on the writing. And so I'll share snippets. For me, what works is Instagram. I love Instagram. It's a platform that's very easy for me to use. And that's kind of my number one platform. I don't use all of them. Twitter, I cannot stand Twitter. Me personally, that's a personal thing. Some people love it, and it's very good for building relationships, and that's fantastic. But each platform actually is very different. It serves a different purpose. And so Twitter, you're not necessarily going to, for me, selling books is obviously important. You're not going to sell books with Twitter. But Instagram just feels more organic for me, and I've just gravitated towards it. And it's been beneficial for me. And so I will spend, 20 minutes or whatever a day, or 15 minutes a day, something very simple, but so that I'm there, I'm still relevant in my head. I'm posting something, people are seeing something from me, but it's not taking 4 hours for me to write, a very long post or anything like that, because I know that I can't do that.
Yeah. And it's like, it's almost like when you were describing the business side versus the creative side, it's like the left brain, right brain,
Yes.
Jumping back and forth from one to the other. I know I've always found it a lot safer on the left brain side, doing the facts, the figures, the strategy, the this and that. But the joy and the passion and the things that could actually make a difference really are coming from the more creative side, and bringing the two of them together is the ideal.
Right.
But I think from the point of view of you're such an experienced writer, I think it's refreshing for someone like me or to be listening, hearing, oh yeah, like even I don't want to age you, but like even a veteran writer is experiencing these challenges and having to navigate them day to day, week to week, month to month, and book to book.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You can get sucked in very easily. I can go on to my computer in the morning and all of a sudden 3 hours are gone. I have no idea where they've gone. They've gone to Facebook and checking stats and this and that and everything else. So there is definitely an element of discipline there, of knowing where your pitfalls can be and trying to avoid them.
Another thing that has so thank you for that, and I'm going to actually take some of that for myself, because I'm at this weird place as we were talking about before we hit record, where there's this big podcast coming out that shares a lot of my story, a shocking amount actually, and I'm over here doing the memoir thing and I haven't been showing it. And now to start showing it and talking about it outside of the protected environment of that course it's a leap. It's a very uncomfortable leap for me, and it's a leap that needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah. You start. I mean, I still remember when I published my very first book, and I hadn't told anyone. Paul knew that I was writing, obviously, because I'm married to him. So he knew I was writing, but nobody else knew. Nobody in my family, nobody. And I just put it out there, and then I posted something on Facebook, or I think Facebook was pretty much the only thing back then. There was no Twitter, no Instagram, nothing like that. And I just said, yeah, I wrote a book here, and if you want to read it, and then that was it. But even just doing that was so difficult, but you just have to leap at some point.
As your career has evolved and you have a platform, one of the things that I notice is you've become increasingly vocal online to support issues that you care about. What's that been like for you?
You know what? A lot of people, definitely creatives, any sort of public figure, any writer, anyone is constantly told, or has been constantly told, don't say anything. Keep your opinions to yourself. We want to read your books, and that's it. We don't want to hear about your opinions. We don't want to hear anything. And some people abide by that. I also personally, I don't enjoy confrontation in any way, shape, or form. And so I've always made an effort to kind of, just stay, I don't want to offend people. There's so many different personalities, there's so many different viewpoints, there's so much everything that I've never wanted to offend people. But just with the world's, what's been going on with the world lately, especially, I just gotten to the point where I can't stay completely quiet anymore. And I feel like if I have a platform, why would I not potentially share some of my viewpoints? Now, I try to not go overboard. I mean, there's some people who are, that's what they talk about. And that's when you get into the Twitter world. That's where people just go there, basically, I feel like, to be angry. So, there are those people who get very, very passionate, which is fine. And they want to share their opinions and they want to scream and shout. I'm not that person, but I feel like every once in a while there might be something going on that I might be able to say something that would resonate with a person, with somebody. I mean, in the past, I've never been shy about talking about autism, children with autism, obviously, because I have personal experience with that. And a lot of people don't, but a lot of people do. And so if I can actually say something or do something that might resonate with them, or bring them some comfort that they're not alone, then I want to be able to help and say something in that way. And obviously with a lot of what's been happening lately in the US, my market is predominantly US. And so everything in my social media feed is all about the States, and whether it's political, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement, which is not really just the US, that's worldwide. There's always, to me, opportunities to make a stance and say something. And it got to the point for me where it felt wrong to not say something. And that's where I would say something.
Would you characterize that as you felt a sense of responsibility then? Like
Absolutely.
The sense of responsibility became greater than the desire to not rock the boat or stay neutral?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm generally, I like to be neutral, but it's to the point where, I mean, this is beyond, politics. This is beyond anything. This is, human rights. I have readers of all ages, of all races, and I want to be able to show my support for them. And they get to the point where, I will say something now. But then there's also the element of me being able to share. So especially over the last few weeks, there's been all kinds of really interesting and important articles, history lessons, everything. So for me to be able to read through it, first of all, because I always read through things before I share them. That's kind of like a golden rule. Mm-hmm. But to be able to read and then share, and then with any of my platform or any of my people that are following me, might resonate with them, or might educate them, might help them open their eyes. Why would I not do that?
Even I just before I went, I think we spoke actually just before I wrote my article and did my podcast, taking my public stand, because I wasn't struggling with the issue at all. I was struggling with, is it my place?
Right.
And there was a bit of that going on, but by longtime listeners of the podcast will have already heard the interview that I just recorded yesterday with a gentleman named Charles Wilson. And he was behind the scenes reading my, what I wrote. And he's a Black man, living in Las Vegas, composes, doesn't just play the piano, but very successful in the entertainment industry. And it was so, not, I guess I did need the validation because I didn't want to put out something that was like, oh, hey, you white lady.
Yeah.
Who are, when it's really a time to share the microphone and to listen, and read and take things in. But knowing about the Wondering podcast and knowing about potential media coming up, I felt like anyone who comes across any of my platforms, politically, it's not hard to figure out where I land. I land left, right? But, and just from how I speak, the guests I have, all of that. But I didn't want there to be any doubt whatsoever to newcomers that there would be any cowardice or hesitation to take a stand, just to be neutral.
Right. There's times to be, there's times to be neutral. There's times to provide, maybe a voice that is more educational than anything else. And then there's times to take a stand. And this was a no-brainer. Like when I say this, I mean the Black Lives Matter movement, just everything that's been happening lately. And it's been tough. The world has been tough the last few months between the pandemic and everything.
Yeah. I think, I know I'm tired, you know, like it's this, and those are some of the things in my line of work I can speak to more as things, new normalize, right? Like old normal, I don't think exists. And I think that's okay. I'm not looking forward to the economic climate that we're going to be stuck in.
Yeah.
By any sense. I do feel some comfort in having been able to thrive and really support people during the Great Recession.
Right.
And so all the more call to keep showing up and not get lost in issues or stories or any distracted from that as a goal. But I really feel like we're all being called to become more self-aware, more aware of each other, and more empathetic, and to really consider taking a stand for a different kind of leadership and not because the status quo has really got us where we are. Absolutely.
Well, and it's the writing community has been interesting, and I don't know how obviously I'm in tune with what writers are saying, but there are writers who, are sitting there thinking, do I change my books now? Going forward, should they all be wearing masks and socially distancing? Should I is this a dystopian world now? Is this, it's funny how everything has impacted. It is even impacting people creatively. Why can't I say that word? You can edit that part out.
I might not. I probably won't, just because it's so important, right? Like creatively, it's affecting people.
Yeah.
And I think even in the less creative, I kind of see coaching as being less creative than it's always creating, but it's more in the moment in terms of what gets put out there. And so I think you can create content as a coach and not necessarily have to be considering, do my characters or what I'm writing about, is it important to include the mask?
Yeah. I mean, and it seems so silly in a way when you think about it, but at the same time, there are people out there who are genuinely writers who are genuinely blocked right now because of that. As fiction writers, it's just so. I mean, when I bring this up, I mean all of our environment, how it can impact you. The book that I just released, I actually had to stop writing it back in February. I think it was February or March. I had to just put it down for a week or two, and I thought, you know what, I might not even finish this because it was so fluffy and so it's a contemporary romance. It's a fun, flirty book. And I thought, I can't write this. There are people dying out there right now. How do I write this book? I don't care about any of these characters. I don't care about anything that's going on in this book. I literally had to put it down because of my environment around me. And I had to make a conscious choice, to do that. So it's, yeah. The environment can be, you have to pivot, you have to make choices, we can't control what's going on around you, but you have to react and decide how you're going to react to it.
Absolutely. And you're totally in my wheelhouse now too, because one of the things that I'm often coaching around or have content and programs around is environment always wins,
right.
Which is a daunting thing right now, because our environment has been giving us an ass kicking, like an invisible ass kicking, that there's so many metaphors at play. And I don't even feel ready at this point to be talking about or writing or producing content about those things, because we're still in it and figuring it out. But when you look at there's so little that we can control, and we've been shown that. But that doesn't mean that we can't exercise influence and discernment moment to moment and be moving forward with more of an understanding of delayed gratification. Like, we're all being asked for delayed gratification, which I think a lot of people have lost touch with.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, you can't see my gray roots here, but trust me, they're there. So I'm going to be very gratified when those get fixed.
I'm actually, it's interesting because I've written the chapter of my book where I shaved my head in 2009 at the
Did you write that already?
I did. I wrote it first.
Okay, that would have been probably a hard one.
There hasn't been an easy one yet, to be honest. So I jumped right in there in February, and I was like, I just had to get it out. And then I wrote the Sweat Lodge up to the point where we were in and sat down. And then I couldn't continue at that time with it, because I think I was on vacation, to be honest. And then because we were away and I was writing this from Hawaii. So I was like, all right, I'm not doing that while I'm on vacation. And then we came home March 8th and pandemic hit. And I was just like, I can't go there. The irony is, now that I've heard the Wondery Guru podcast description of it, I'm not sure I can do a better job writing it than they have putting together that scene. It's actually tremendous research for me to be able to go to once it's more publicly available and draw a more rounded narrative, because it's more than one voice describing it, not just my spotty memory. That's another challenge with it. But we kind of went down the hair rabbit hole here.
Yeah, we do that.
Yeah, women do that. But hair is such a huge part of my story, right?
Yeah.
That it fits somehow in terms of, I'm at the point now, pandemic, like I came home and that was the last thing I did before the things shut down, was because I'd already grown out. And now I'm almost regretful that I did it, because I might be on the verge of not coloring it.
Of letting go.
Yeah. Yeah. And seeing what that could be like, because I've seen online some examples of silver haired women in their 50s, who have let it go, and they've not let it go. It looks amazing. So there's still that vanity ass. I'm not letting it go to let it go. It's like, what if I didn't have to, for every 6 weeks, sit for 3 hours in a freaking chair?
Well, I know for a fact I am not ready to do it. And I've proven it to myself.
You're too young, man. First of all, let's not forget that. But oh yeah, it's interesting times for sure. And how is it? You've got do you go with names or thing one and thing two? What's your public thing?
So, I mean, I'm on social media, I always say thing one, thing two. I'm not, obviously that's a bit weird to say that here.
Oh, we can do thing one. That's fine. So thing
but,
one, this is public. This is a public conversation.
well,
So
it's one of those weird things where I feel like if I'm always addressing my kids by their name, then strangers will address them by their name. And to me, that makes me uncomfortable. So yeah.
Yeah. So no, let's stay. I want to honor that. That's, they're my nieces, and if you want their privacy, intact, I want their privacy intact, and, let alone safety. So, you're at home with thing one and thing two, who couldn't be more different from each other. Thing one, this feels weird for me to talk about them as thing one and thing two, but
that's why I was saying, I'm like, this is us.
Fine. But so thing one is my goddaughter, and she was born while I was still living out west, and I came back to meet her when you were still in your townhouse, and still your first maternity.
That's right.
And Guitar Hero Christmas, and
oh, she was such an easy baby. I think we had her in the sling, and we were playing Guitar Hero with her in the sling, I think.
And now all these years later, so she's on the spectrum for autism. And thing two is, where thing one is tall, thing two is very tiny and compact. Where thing one has autism, thing two is probably at the far high end of IQ and athletic ability.
Coordination and everything. She's her dad. Yeah.
I know. I used to kind of hate him when he was young. He did everything. So you're at home with the two girls, and like so many other people right now, for the foreseeable will be. What have been some things that you have, you shared about the door and the sign on the door, in order to maintain your sanity and be productive? What are some things you've had to do, either for self-care or for fun, or how are you navigating this as a multifaceted human being who has
so I would say, normally I love my routine, and I work in my office, and that's what I love. And I would send them off to school, and then I'd get my coffee and my breakfast, and I'd sit down in front of the computer and do my marketing and whatnot. And then I'd work from 10 till 2. I would write, and obviously that has completely been derailed. And so now that they're home, we got in. Basically, I've given myself grace. I've said, I'm not going to be productive with work in the morning. And I sit down and we focus on schoolwork, and, we do what we can in the morning. Obviously, thing two, she's pretty self-sufficient. Thing one, I need to sit down with, and I'm learning all about grade 7, history and science and math and everything all over again, which is so not what I want to be doing, but whatever. It is what it is. My biggest thing has been giving myself, what's the word? Just allowing myself to not be as productive as I normally am. I mean, I had to make changes. I had to push a release and then my editor back twice for the book that I just released. And that is a very stressful thing for me to do. But I said, you know what, this is what it is. This is what we're going to have to do. And this is how I'm going to be able to cope, because I won't be able to deliver on this deadline with all of this coming out. And so I had to pivot. I had to change my plan. And I did that. So that was a big element for me to manage, was just accepting that things were not going to work the way that I normally allow them to work or want them to work. And I mean, we've worked in the mornings. I work with the girls in the morning, and then Paul comes home and he gets some of the other subjects, and the music and the dance and science and some of the history and stuff. So I focused on the literacy and the math in the morning. And we were just joking about it before, but I mean, thing one is basically done science and history now. It's not happening anymore. She's done for the year. So we've had to, and this school's been great. The teachers have been great with saying, okay, we understand, just do what you can do. It all comes down to a lot of forgiveness for myself. I guess that's what I've had to do. I mean, I know that sounds a little bit silly maybe, but I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I think as any self-employed person, anyone who's running their own schedule, and if you're a type A person, I'm a type A person. If you like to hit your goals and your targets, you set expectations for yourself and you want to hit them. And I get very frustrated if I don't. But in this world and in this environment, I have not been able to do that, and I've accepted it. So
I love what you said there. And, it's the idea, there's nothing soft or silly or weak about giving yourself some grace, practicing some forgiveness, and then figuring out how to navigate. That's very much, even in normal times, I've emerged with, my summer of self-care and winter of self-care programs, because for me, that was the path to being able to come back after such a horrifying experience of handling basically personal trauma and collective trauma, and then having to navigate as a functioning human being. And that's one of the reasons why I was very, very moved to start up my leadership community, because I saw, I saw the collective trauma that was happening or about to happen. And,
right.
It was reminiscent of the recession, but it was harder, faster, and included everybody at once. So
right. Yeah.
There's real power in that, because that's what allows you to move forward, to let some of it go and focus in on what's really important.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, my goals are still the same. I still have the same goals. It's just you have to find another path to get there, and it might be a longer path, but you can still get there. And so that's very much me. I'm a planner. I like to plan, and I like to see where I'm going, except apparently when I'm writing, because I have no clue where I'm going most of the time. But yeah, so I just had to change things.
Oh man, I wish that had come up earlier. Let's loop back around to the writing just a little bit.
Sure.
I've heard that before, and I've seen it in you when you say sometimes on social media, on Instagram, I'm writing this, I have no idea where I'm going, this and that. And for me, that is like, what? Like,
yeah,
my brain doesn't work that way, but I'm also not writing fiction. So,
right. Well, that makes it completely different.
But actually I have no freaking idea where I'm going right now. I'm stuck in grade 8.
So cool.
What the hell am I saying? It's just different, right? So
yeah.
I know at some point I know where it needs to go.
Right. You have a target. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you, so does that imply, like, do you write a lot of stuff that doesn't end up being used? Is it circuitous? Is that editing, or what the heck?
So no, so some people are planners, and they'll have an outline, and some people can sit there and they will outline. I read somebody wanted some critique advice and another author. And so she sent me her outline, and it was like 22 pages long, and it was beautiful. And I read through this outline, and it was basically the book. I read the book, and it's 22 pages. And I thought, how do you do this? Because I can't do this. I create as I go. And so the characters come to life for me, and the story comes to life as I sit down and I'm writing them. I have absolutely no clue where I'm going usually. Mind you, after 20 something books, I found an outlining method that works for me. And it's a very, very loose outlining method, but it's one that allows me to have some clue as to where I'm going to end up, because I was starting these books basically it's almost like having a bow and arrow and just shooting it randomly out there and having no clue where I have no target. I have no idea where it's hitting. That's how I started my books before. Now I do start with outlines, but most of the time, the book changes completely. If I were to look, even the last books that I wrote, if I were to look at the outline of what I wrote and the outline versus what the book actually, like what happened, they're different. They're always different. But yeah, I've written myself into corners before, which is never fun. But I'm the type of person that the story doesn't come to life till I'm writing it. So I have no clue. When I sit down in the morning, I might have no clue where I'm going that day.
So from the time that you stop, say as your daily practice of writing, from the time that you stop writing to say, let's call it, I'm sure it's not always the afternoon. I have known you as a bit of a night owl, but by the time you stop the writing and start up again the next day, is it on your mind? Like, are you ruminating and pondering it in between, or is it like open it? You've already answered. So yes, it's developing as you go.
Yeah. And it's constantly, and it's funny, especially if I'm on deadline, because I typically write on deadline and usually always write to the wire with the editor before I can send it in. And in those last few, call it a week or two before it has to be finished, my brain is it's constantly going to the point where I have night terrors. And that's when you always know when my brain is constantly going. This only ever started when I started writing. And so around a deadline, I will have night terrors. And I mean, it scares Paul to hell. It's never a good thing for him, poor guy. But that's when I know, because my brain does not shut down. And so it's just constantly spinning. And yeah, so it's a little bit of a crazy time.
And you've learned that's part of your process. It's not something that, because I'm sure like there's part of me that wants to start that, well, do you meditate and this and that and everything else? But it's like, this is a part of your process, is this disruption to sleep as it's coming together. And
it's I would, like I said, I've tried so many different kinds of outlines. I found one that does work, but it works because it's still extremely loose, and my brain I still have room to be creative and come up, let it go as I'm writing. So, but yeah, it's not fun. Deadline time is not fun in this house, but it, I always get there, and it's part of my process. I can't change it. It is what it is.
This has been it's fascinating. And I'm so glad that we did this, because it gives a different insight into your creative life and how that integrates into your family life, which I love. Before we wrap up, tell us a bit about your most recent book, and maybe if somebody was learning about you for the first time as an author, books that you're super proud of and would be a really good first hook, if it's not one and the same.
Sure. Well, I would say, so the last one I wrote, I write contemporary romance mainly, but I also write women's fiction. I've written some suspense and thriller, got a couple YAs in there. So I'm quite eclectic with everything. The latest one I wrote was just called The Player Next Door. It's just like a fun, flirty contemporary romance. It was meant to be an escape for contemporary romance lovers. Right now, especially just with the environment, it's a good summer read, I would call it. If you were to pick up your first book of mine, I would say the best one would probably be The Simple Wilds. That's a kind of a contemporary romance women's fiction blend, and that's been an exciting book for me. And I've actually written a second one, the sequel, which came out in February, called Wild at Heart,
which I haven't read yet, but I will vouch for The Simple Wild. I had the very strange experience of finishing it, sat on a lawn chair next to you at your cottage.
Right.
And I was bawling.
It's an emotional book. I mean,
is.
I'm not an emotional person at all. You know me. And I'm not an emotional writer at all, but that book was difficult to write. So
I'm here to say that she can do it. And that's what was so, it was a poignant moment. I don't know if you remember it, but I finished it. I had tears coming down my face, and I turned to you. I was like, oh, Kathleen, you just made me cry.
Well, I was sitting there thinking, she's reading my book right beside me. This is weird.
What kind of alternate universe? It's like, look what I brought to finish. Oh my gosh. Well, what a joy and a privilege to have you on. And I'm very grateful that in the middle of the launch, you've come on here, and I'm excited to introduce you to the listeners here and my audience. And I hope that yours will enjoy hearing this side of you.
They might. I don't know. I hope so. Yeah.
I'm sure they'll let you know.
Yeah, they probably will.
Take care and say hi to Thing 1, 2, and Paul for me.
I will. Okay. Awesome. Okay,
Bye.
Bye.